Hello and welcome to the Tank Club. Today we're going to be doing a gear set review for the tank set, the Pearlescent Ward. Okay, so this is a new set with the High Isle patch. It is a heavy armor set that drops in the new trial Dreadsail Reef. If you want the regular gear, you need to do it on normal. If you want the perfected gear, you need to do it on veteran. So the pieces that you're going to need for this set, you're going to want all the pieces for the versatility, but generally you can just use this on the body because it's a heavy set, so for a tank that's going to be okay. And that means you can also pair it with other gear sets that we quite often use for tanking and off tanks as well. So if we take a little look at the gear set and what it does, we've got 2 items that gives 1206 max health. We've got 3 items which gives minor Aegis, reducing your damage taken from dungeon trial and arena monsters by 5%. 4 items, we've got 4% healing taken. For the perfected 5 items, we get another 1206 maximum health. And for the 5 items, grants you and up to 11 other group members Pearlescent Ward. This bonus persists through death. Pearlescent Ward increases weapon and spell damage by up to 180 based on the number of group members that are alive. Pearlescent Ward increases the damage reduction from non-player enemies out of 66% based on the number of group members that are dead. So one of the great things about this set, first of all, is the lack of micromanagement required to keep this active. You put the 5-piece on and you have the bonus. It is a group buff and it is a damage buff. Now, this set will scale with your group size, so if it's just you and one other person, you would get 180 weapon and spell damage. If that person then dies, you get the 66% damage reduction. If you've got 11 group members or 4 group members, it will scale with the amount of people within your group. So you'll get that weapon and spell damage based upon the amount of people that are alive based upon your group size. So that is how it's going to function. Now, one of the interesting things about this gear set is it becomes a safety gear set once people start to die. So it's a group damage buff, and then once somebody dies, you lose a bit of the damage buff and you gain a bit of damage reduction. And the more people that die, the bigger the damage reduction and the lower the damage buff. Because obviously when people are starting to die, the priority would be to resurrect and try and recover. And in that situation, you're going to be getting damage reduction, which should make it easier to actually get those resurrections and to try and recover the trial or the dungeon or whatever it is, whatever piece of content it is that you're doing. So for me, this is a very, very interesting gear set because of that. It's got a damage reduction aspect to it. It becomes a safety gear set when you need the safety. And I think it's kind of unique in that way because we don't have other gear sets that provide group safety that are worth using. There are very few gear sets that have ever been created that have been worth using for group safety. When I kind of think about in past updates, Vrol's Command, for example, really, really poor quality gear set in terms of group safety. The only group safe gear set we've ever really used for tanking was Ebon. That was the only kind of meta tank set that provided any kind or any value of safety. And there's obviously been other gear sets over the years as well that some groups have used, but they haven't ever been like a meta must-have always used gear set. Things like, I don't know, Imperium, for example, which isn't that good of a gear set either. But with this, we do get a damage buff, we do get a damage reduction, we get a safety aspect to it, we get a group buff aspect to it. It's easy to use, it's easy to manage. This is probably going to be the biggest selling point, is especially for newer players, being able to provide buffs with little micromanagement is always something that's very, very good. So the reason why gear sets like Ebon and Worm and Yolnacrin have always been very, very good is because it's a damage buff or it's a group buff with very little micromanagement. When you look at a gear set like Powerful Assault, that is so much more difficult to manage because you've got to be casting something every 10 seconds. In a trial group, you've got to cast something twice every 10 seconds to maintain those buffs on your group. with a gear set like this, you just stand there and you give your group a buff. Now the range on this set seems to be somewhere around the 28 meter radius, so if you are further away than 28 meters, then you are not going to provide the buffs that are provided from this set. If you die wearing this set, you will gain the benefits for your group still, even though you die. So as a tank, if you are dying and wearing this gear set, you're still going to provide those benefits to the group. They exist even while dead, so that's another kind of little bonus to that. I think it's going to be a gear set that is going to be very useful for players in dungeon content, in 4-person content. For things like, if you're doing random dungeons, if you're using the dungeon queue, this is going to be useful. If you've got those situations where group members die, it's going to be useful. If you're progressing trials, it's going to be a useful gear set. In terms of trial content, and when it comes to like optimization and stuff, you've got like a couple of different ways to really look at this. You've got option number 1, which is a beginner group. And you've got to consider the fact that I hear a lot of tanks being told, obviously they have to run Powerful Assault, which is absolutely true because it's one of the best gear sets that we wear for tanking. And there's obviously not a huge amount of other options either. But when it comes to the actual uptime, if you are progressing a trial and you've got an off-tank who is inexperienced and they've got a super low uptime on Powerful Assault, you'd be far better off getting them in this gear set in Pearlescent Ward, where they're going to have 100% uptime. It's going to be a guaranteed buff. It's going to be there the whole time, rather than something that might have a 20, 30, 40% uptime, but it's like it's almost never there because they're having to micromanage it. They're not getting it on everybody. In that situation, it's not really worth them using it. When it comes to more experienced groups, combining Pearlescent Ward and Powerful Assault, and having your Yolnacrin in there with your Major Courage and your Minor Courage from your Spell Power Cure as well. Obviously, adding all of these buffs together is possible because they stack. They are all different buffs. So, Major Courage, there can only be one source of Major Courage. We get that from Spell Power Cure or Olarim. We can only have one source of Minor Courage, typically from Yolnacrin. You can then have a source of Powerful Assault because that is a unique damage buff. You can only have one of those though. Powerful Assault, that's one buff. Then you get another buff now from Pearlescent Ward. It's another unique buff, so you can have one person providing that. So there's lots and lots of damage buffs now that we can provide while wearing these strong tank sets that give other tank benefits. So I think really that is going to be, those are going to be your options. It's going to be most likely for trial content. In a lot of situations, you're going to have your main tank using Yolnacrin and Turning Tide, and your off tank potentially using Pearlescent Ward and PA, or Pearlescent Ward and Sax, or Crimson, or something, depending on your group. Things now are so difficult for me personally to set up in terms of on the website. So when I create builds for the website for every trial, every situation, it's hard for me to really lock in the exact build that you might require because there are so many different options now and it's so group dependent. So even when you go and look at the Tank Club website and you're looking at builds, those are just suggestions because there are so many different ways to customize your group now, and it really does depend on experience levels and how good your group is and what sort of level your group play at, if they're wearing medium armor, if they're wearing light armor, what sort of setup you have, like what are the other people in your group using. There's so many different things to consider when setting up a group now. So there is no one way or no one setup that is going to be better than everything else. So if we have a look at some strengths for the Pearlescent Ward gear set, it's a group DPS benefit. It is a group survival tool when people are dead. It is 100% uptime. It is always there if you're wearing the set. It's no micromanagement, it's just automatic. It's great for beginner groups and it's great for beginner tanks because it provides that buff with no effort, and also it's going to be better than using something that they can't maintain, like Powerful Assault, like Martial Knowledge, Elemental Catalyst. Those kind of gear sets on a tank in a beginner group are going to be absolutely terrible. Using this instead is going to be the better option. In experienced groups, it's another damage buff. It's an additional damage buff to grab and pop into your setup. Now, some of the weaknesses. Obviously, the buff that you get is weaker than all other damage buffs that we've already got. So it's not as strong in a way. Like the damage buff is weaker than Major and Minor Courage, it's weaker than Powerful Assault, but it's still a damage buff nonetheless. One of the other weaknesses is Dreadsail Reef is a pretty hard trial. So to get the perfected gear, that is going to be a bit of a challenge, because this trial is actually quite difficult on veteran. So for people that are coming in here, you're going to have a hard time, I'm going to be honest. On normal, this trial is even quite difficult on normal. If you're going in there with people that are inexperienced in trial content, it could be a challenge even on normal. So farming this gear is going to be a little bit of a challenge. You could see this as a strength or a weakness, it really depends, but some people are really against the visual effects of this gear set, so the floating orbs that are moving around my character. Obviously some people do not like that, so that could be a weakness in that regards. Again, another big weakness would be the fact that if you are planning on running this on weapons and jewelry, you're going to have to kill the last boss or loot chests for those pieces. And with this being a more difficult trial, it's going to take a very long time for you to farm this. You could call this a weakness, but in one aspect of it, obviously if you've got somebody who's always dying, if you've got a couple of people in your group that die quite often, it's going to be a frustrating gear set to use it in some situations, because when you're trying to provide that damage buff and you've got somebody who isn't following mechanics, who isn't listening, who isn't paying attention, that could be a bit of a weakness, because then you're going to be losing damage. You're going to be losing some of the damage buff because you've got people who don't follow the mechanics, or don't listen, or don't follow instructions, and then it affects the rest of the group. So I'm going to give this set a rating, and we're going to base it on this criteria. So first off, we've got ease of use, and this is absolutely got to be a 5 out of 5, because obviously you don't have to do anything, it's just automatically there. So that makes it probably one of the best sets in the game in terms of the ease of use. The ease to obtain, a 2 out of 5. You've got to do a trial, it's a new trial, it's a kind of difficult trial, so a 2 out of 5. Usefulness to the tank, we've got some health benefits in there, we have got some minor Aegis, the healing taken. I'm not really that keen on healing taken buffs myself, I'd rather have stats or recovery, so for that reason we're going to give this a 4 out of 5. And usefulness to the group, it is the weakest damage buff we can provide. It does get diminished if people die. It's still a very, very useful gear set for your group. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 as well for the group. So if we add those together and we divide it by 4, that gives us a set rating of 4 out of 5 for the Pearlescent Ward gear set. This is going to be a must-have gear set for next patch. For dungeon content, for arenas, for trials, depending on the level that you're playing at, the ease of this gear set to use makes it just invaluable. And so I suggest as soon as the patch comes out, try and grab hold of this. Ideally you just want to get it on the body pieces, because that's going to be easier to farm than on the weapons and the jewelry. And yeah, this is a good gear set that is definitely worth putting some time and investment into. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.